we have 80% connected to the internet, 78% active in social media, and so these are all the people that we actually need to protect when talking about cybersecurity. The device usage is also very centered around smartphones basically. So 88% smartphones, 97%, 96% use any mobile device. So that's definitely a place we need to protect it. And also, similar to what we heard in the previous session, I guess many of you can relate that 38% use the internet every day. For me at least, that's definitely true. Every day I'm basically online. So, what's the problem behind these numbers? I mean, okay, you have many people connected to the internet. How is that bad? If you look at some cyber threat reports from published in the industry, you see all these fancy numbers. How many DDoS is a very high and hot topic we have already heard, and that we basically have a lot of problems in cybersecurity. And if we focus on the center part, there's basically three biggest obstacles or challenges. And one, that's the lack of skilled personnel. So we need more people like us, basically, in this room, to protect the people from all the bad actors in the cyberspace. Then there's no security awareness amongst employees, and also on every person, basically. And also, at some point, there's too much data to analyze. So usually you collect all this data also during this project on botnets, for example, but that's just too much. You need, in combination with the lack of personnel, you need more people and more efficient ways to look at the data to actually see what's happening. So that's definitely something we have to address. And also, if you look at this graph, by now it's not a surprise anymore because the legend is there, but if you just look at the pie chart, you would hope that maybe the time until the attack is discovered is very short. So usually you want to have something like an attacker is in the network and we discover it immediately, but the reality looks a little bit different. So usually the median number of days an attacker is undetected in the network is actually above 200 days, which is a lot. And the longest present is even these 2,982 days, is the known longest presence. And that's more than 8 years. So imagine what an attacker does in the network if he's undetected for 8 years. It's pretty bad. And also interesting, more breaches are actually notified by, or are actually discovered by external organizations. So only 30% were actually the organizations detected the attack themselves, but in the other cases, some external companies contacted them and said, hey, you may have a breach there. So that's also due to the lack of skilled personnel. So, what does this mean for us? We've already heard that for users, basically, it's very dangerous to use the internet, or can be very dangerous. And actually, because more and more people are using the internet, there's all these threats that basically can attack them. And also, there's this interesting statistic that 95% of all cybersecurity incidents involve some kind of human error. So it's very, very few actually problems where there's no human involved, and usually at some point there's a human that does some error or does something wrong, and then you have a cybersecurity incident. So we need to basically educate, we need to improve the knowledge in the people, and that's also why I'm talking about attack vectors. And also, we have to question ourselves, if this is the attacker, so that's a very dumb attacker maybe, how does he actually breach our devices? So we think they are secure, we have our smartphones and they have sandboxes and all these security features, but they still get in. And how does this happen? And that's basically what I'm trying to talk to you in this session about. So the motivation, there are important ways you can protect yourself in your organization. So this is the first thing I want to start with. Although the rest of the presentation may look very bad, there are ways you can protect yourself, and that is especially education. But to do that, we have to understand the methods the cyber criminals actually use to accomplish their attacks. So how do they get in? And this is basically what attack vectors are. So some example questions you can asked here basically are how does malware propagate from one machine to another, how do victims get infected, which we've talked a lot about by now, and what are common types of malware that is on the internet, for example, and a lot of other questions. So first, what is an attack vector? It's in the title of the session. This definition that I found is basically says it like this: it's a path or means by which a threat agent, so a malicious actor, either gains access to a network or computer server, or abuses weaknesses or vulnerabilities on these assets to achieve a specific outcome, which in our case is probably a bad outcome for our organization. So basically ways to inflict harm on your assets. And this is basically the categories we are talking about today. So we have social engineering and phishing, especially, which we've heard something about, and all these other categories. And hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you all know, for example, these three concrete examples that you probably have heard about, in which category they are. Also, these are not all categories that exist; those are just the major ones, and also some categories are named differently by others. But yeah, that's just the collection that we chose basically to talk about. So the first one is phishing. We've already heard about that in the previous session, so I'll take it and make it brief. It's basically attacking the human, as expected, and manipulating them into performing actions, or more important maybe, giving out information. So that can be stuff like a phone call that says, "This is John, the system admin, what is your password?" And if you answer that, of course, the password is gone. But also maybe some more subtle ways that are not so obvious. If someone just asks you about your mother's maiden name, which is a common security question on all these services you probably don't know. So this question might seem totally unsuspicious, but actually it might be maybe a malicious person who's asking you and giving out the information. And of course there's a lot of other things like emails, which are the most common ones, and even like people that come here and say, "Oh, I have updates for you," and actually they install some other. So social engineering is just attacking the human and basically manipulating. As we said, that's rather effective. So if you think about these 95% where humans are involved, the how is basically two steps. So first you collect information like the maiden name, the password, whatever, and then you use this information to exploit the people or the accounts or their credentials or their info. The result is that your security system is usually circumvented. Even the firewall is useless, because of course from the inside it looks like it's a legitimate login attempt because someone stole your credentials. So it doesn't help if you want to attack the attackers. If someone logs in with the correct credentials, you basically lost, because it's a legitimate attempt and you cannot really easily detect it that it's the result of a phishing attack. And the information is basically given out correctly as designed. But of course, it's a vector. So phishing especially is just about stealing credentials or stealing information. For financial gain, could also be other gains, just like espionage or something. Usually this is done through emails. So we're talking about phishing specifically. We're talking about phishing emails. And these are just these emails that you all know probably that are disguised as some legitimate emails, maybe from the bank, maybe from your boss, maybe from someone else. And they want you to download a file, to execute a file, to click a link or something like that. Banks are very common for that. And just a small case study. So here is this email that may look legitimate from the first try, and it's a very simple email, but of course, in this case, there are multiple points where you can detect that this is a phishing email, which we will talk about. But here you can see already the bank looks maybe suspicious from the address. The message itself is very simple and doesn't look really, there's no image from the bank included, so it's probably not real. Another one is this one. This looks a little bit more legitimate, but also there are some ways which you can find out if it's legitimate or not. So the link that you just saw redirects to this page, and this is the official website of, I think it's a Malaysian bank. And this is basically the fake one that is behind this phishing URL that you just saw. And there are some small differences which are maybe not immediately obvious, but first, of course, the URL is different. So the first one looks like legitimate, it's uov.com.my, and the second one is just this random characters. Is probably not the bank. And also, you have this difference in the web page itself, so the bank includes the current time, and the fake page does not do that. So, yeah, these are some indicators that show you the fake news page. And also, how can you spot this in the email directly? So usually you should never trust the display name, because you can see here it says PayPal, but of course the actual email address that is behind is something different. So because the PayPal, the display name can be set to anything, you cannot trust it. You have to check the email itself. Exactly highlighted this is not an official PayPal email address. Also here the greetings or the salutations are very generic. So usually if a bank contacts you, they know your name, so they can just say, hello Mr. Wilkins, and they don't have to say hello customer, because they have this information. And then especially important for the URLs, which you probably also know, it's easy, most times it's easy to spot the phishing site, for example, because there's a large string of random characters included. But you should never click it and then see it in the browser, because then it might be already too late. There might be an exploit, for example, where you don't have to even enter credentials if you're already connected. But you can check the destination by hovering over the button of the link, and then at the bottom you see here the T.co option, of course, that may redirect to anything. And if you still want to check, then you can just type the URL and not click it if you're suspicious. So this is also an link. And also some points or something that works sometimes, but I've seen phishing mails getting actually better and better in the last years. Usually there's some kind of mistyping in the email or some typographical errors. So here is, for example, Google Chrome in lower caps, so that would probably be all caps or like uppercase in the real email. So that is the easy way to stop phishing, but in the last years, as I said, they've been getting better and better and actually using spell check or stuff like that. Right, so these are ways to detect the phishing intents. Last one is also usually they want to trigger you into clicking the links, so they're important. Your account is breached, your account is hacked, your account is whatever, your account is inactive. So that's usually, or it can also be an indicator of phishing email. And usually, of course, there's the other emails here that you want $1 million and you just click this thing into that information. If it's too good to be true, it usually is someone who wants to do bad things to you. So other tips that you can use not just for phishing attempts, but for other social engineering attacks with these URL shorteners that we just saw, so T.co, you don't really know what's behind that. So all these services that shorten URLs between TCO or whatever. There are ways to circumvent that. There's basically URL expander services, and you can just put in a shortened URL, it gives you the full URL, and then you can decide if you want to visit that site or not. That can be suspicious. If the file or URL is malicious that you should execute or download, of course you hopefully have an antivirus on your machine already, but if you're still not sure, then you can use sites like BD2, which checks software, I think 30 or something antivirus software, and then you can, if no one finds anything in this file, then you can be reasonably sure that it's not a malicious file. And also, the general thing is just be paranoid, because if someone asks for your credit card details, there might be some very small cases where it's legitimate, but usually it's someone who wants to just take the credit card details and steal your money. So being paranoid is a good way there. And also, if you spot something that impersonates a specific organization, for example, your bank or your paper or whatever, you can usually do calling or emailing or whatever. Most organizations have a security contract basically, and they can report, you should report phishing attempts, so they can actually basically try to find the person that sent out the phishing stuff. So that's phishing or social engineering in general. Remote access is a little bit more on the technical side. So usually attackers or hackers or criminals, cyber criminals, whatever, use open ports on a machine or some vulnerabilities in your web application to gain unauthorized access to a server. That can be SQL injection, that can, if they have shell access, they can also download malware. If they are on your server, then you've basically lost already. But remote access just basically contains all these types of attacks. Usually that can also be a problem if you have poorly configured devices with default username and password combinations. So you probably all remember nearby, and we also talk on a day, I think, tomorrow. This one is just leverage default combinations on so many machines that do not change and basically attack them this way. And also, because it's especially easy for these attacks to do, you can use, or the attacker can use sites like Showdown.io, which basically search the internet continuously and identify bad default credentials. And if you're really lazy, you can just go to Showdown, type in some credentials that you know are default somewhere, and then get a list of IPs that you can directly attack, basically. So, that's definitely a problem. Then there's insider threats. So either the criminal itself is an insider of the organization, or he has help from the person inside the organization. They usually use the credentials or the permissions that the internal or the internal person has to perform the attack. That might be willingly or that might be unwillingly. So if your credentials get compromised, and this could also count as an insider threat, and then further attacks are launched to your network. And this basically includes any use of unauthorized or malicious use of organizational resources. So for example, if your employee gets phished and clicks the link and his credentials are stolen, and then these credentials are used to perform an attack, you would basically put this in both categories. It would be an insider threat because the credentials are lost, but it will also be, of course, a successful phishing attempt. And usually, although the attackers mostly come from the outside, there are a lot of cases, not in a percentage, but it should be a lot, attacks that are used or performed by the use of credentials of internal. So, of course, if you want to get to the database, you need someone with access to the database. And the easiest way to get there is probably obtaining the credentials of this person. So most breaches, have this also as a factor. There's also, I don't know why this is in the, it should be there, I think. But here it says 77% of the company's data breaches are caused by insiders. It's a question of how you define basically the cause of a breach, but somehow insiders are involved. And also, it doesn't have to be like a complete security breach every time. It can also be a minor thing. But here it says that 53% of companies that were basically asked in this report had at least one incident in the last 12 months, and 20% more than 6 incidents in the past 12 months. This just means there's a lot of basically problems in this area of potential attacks, and not all of them are basically complete game over scenarios, but they can still be dangerous and they should still be monitored, of course. That makes sense. That makes more sense. And vulnerable data types or vulnerable assets basically that fall into this category are, of course, account information, so there were credentials and passwords, but actually a higher percentage is actually just confidential business information. So even if someone gains access without using credentials, they usually want to target the information of the organization and steal that. They can also be employee data, they can be customer data, that is of course highly sensitive and needs to be protected. But there's also other stuff in there like employee data, so payroll information is also relevant and should be protected. How can this be mitigated? So there you can use identity and access management solutions. So these solutions basically log and perform an action, and they can help to implement segregation of duties. So you have like finer defined set of permissions. So a user can really only perform the actions that he needs to perform in the organization. And then you can, in the end, if an attack has happened, directly see which user performed which actions, and there's an audit trail of how this breach action occurred. You can use database behavior analytics tools. They basically, try to see where the data flowed through your permission system. And of course, the more effective thing is, as always, as most of the times, implementing training and awareness activities for all the people in your organization, so they know when they're being phished, they know when maybe their credentials are being misused, and how they can maybe report even themselves before it is detected somewhere else. And basically the last one is similar to the first one, implement auditing and user monitoring schemes, so see if maybe permissions often change, so that there must be a way that the user gains additional privileges which they hadn't before, and then also an indicator of potential incident. So there are ways this can be mitigated, at least partly. Then again, another different kind of attacks fall in the category of brute force attacks. As you probably know, this is just a systematic check of all passwords, password credential combinations, or keys maybe also to some point, until the correct credential is discovered. And if you can see here, there is, I think, as in B-login, I think, here you see that all these passwords are tried, so administrator, and then it's always username, and then it's winter27, password 427. It looks like some password list that the attacker used, and it always fails until the correct password, which in this case is just password and hash, is found, and the login is successful. So in the audit data, or in the log data here, it can go very easy to spot. So here all these attempts are directly after another, but you can just imagine if this brute force attack is basically distributed over large periods of time, or distributed across many machines, then it gets harder to detect. And basically, as you can already directly imagine, the success of these attacks directly is based on the strength of the password. So here, password is not completely unsafe, basically, because it's similar to the dictionary word, and of course it's not that long. So if you have a more complex password, not just longer, but also based on dictionary words and stuff, then you are immediately safer against these kinds of attacks. And you can also, this is something you can easily enforce via, for example, organization policy. You just say, okay, password cannot be shorter than, I don't know, 16 characters or something, but we'll also come to that. So, yes, brute force attacks, they may look easy to discover, but that's not always the case. Then we have ransomware, and that's again, maybe a little bit more to the botnet direction again. This is basically an application that restricts access to a computer until the ransom is paid, usually Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency that cannot be traced easily. Usually this is done by encrypting the data, but it could also be something that just locks your PC and you cannot really use it in that case. Usually there's some kind of timeout in there, so if no payment is received, the data is deleted or the encryption key is thrown away, something like that. And organizations basically have to choose between paying, which might be successful, might not be successful. There have also been ransomware cases where the organizations actually paid the ransom but still didn't get the data back. Or they lose maybe critical data forever. So if these large attacks from WannaCry, for example, if all your employee PCs are encrypted and the data is all lost, then you lose a large part of your critical data. So for an organization, that's a bad decision to make, and especially bad, at least from my point of view, is that the healthcare sector is especially targeted by ransomware, especially ransomware is especially effective in this area. And here it says that in 2018, more of 85% of all malware that affected healthcare organizations was ransomware, and you've maybe heard about the case in the UK with the NHS, where I think 90% or something their systems were hit by WannaCry. And this is basically due to some unique requirements or unique properties in the healthcare sector that make it easy for an attacker to target that or for ransomware to spread. So usually there's a lack of integration between IT policies and the core hospital operations. So what this means is you might have a policy that says your password has to be changed every six months or something, but then your doctor, who's very rushed and has to do his actual work, which is saving patients' lives, then just sees, oh, there's this prompt again, I have to change my password, and he basically, I don't know, pencil one or increases the number or something like that, which of course is not really sufficient and it's not really, doesn't really fulfill the goal of this policy in the first place. And that's a lot of cases in the healthcare sector because people are overworked and basically don't have time or don't have also the training actually to behave like well in this IT context. How can ransomware be mitigated? It's difficult, depends on how it spreads, but usually you can implement something like network segmentation. So if the ransomware is not able to reach directly all other PCs, then this already helps. You can to some point use data encryption with a key that is stored somewhere else. So if your data is already encrypted somehow and needs this key to be accessed, and you maybe also have backups, then it's not that easy for a ransomware to encrypt it again, or maybe it won't encrypt it again because it detects the encryption basically. But also access control and policy enforcement is highly effective to limit the exposure of data, so you can combine with, for example, the user roles and permissions that you have defined, and you can really limit the spread of the ransomware. And maybe then just shut off the subnet that you segregated, and then, of course, it's still bad that the subnet is infected, but your rest of the organization is safe. You should, to detect that basically, of course, you should monitor the access and the status of the infrastructure that is used. And public here in this case more or less means public in the organization, so something that's maybe shared by multiple users. Maybe something, because then more users can basically get the ransomware system. Maybe some shared computer in a hospital, for example, where doctors and nurses are interacting with it. And of course, as is the trend of this talk, you should invest in user awareness, especially in promoting secure browsing behavior, phishing detection, all that stuff. So the users don't click on random links and emails, and stuff like that, which is usually the first way ransomware gets into any system. Okay, then denial of service, which we've already seen in one of the intro slides. A major problem here. We have this, I think, quite nice graphic that basically describes how this case works. So we have a lot of machines that the attacker controls. That might be botnet machines. That might also be other machines that infected servers that just under the control of the attacker. And they all connect to the same machine. And it might be a web page, so it might be a database, it might be a service, anything. And because this machine is overloaded, the regular or the legitimate requests that we see down here fail, timeout, and cannot be successfully completed. Of course, the goal is to disrupt the normal traffic and exhaust the resources of the machine. And depending on what actual connection you use, there are several variations that also differ in how they can be detected and how they can be mitigated, but the general goal is this. That, of course, in the last years is increasing rapidly. So there's this, I think Akamai reported a 16% increase between 2017 and 2018. So by now it's probably a lot more again, because it's also just so easy to execute. You just need a large number of machines. They don't need to be very powerful. They can be small IP cameras that are basically affected. And they just need network access, and they can immediately perform DDoS. ISP and cloud providers are more or less the organizations that need to mitigate this. So you, as a small organization or as a private user, don't really have high chances to be able to mitigate this successfully, because you need to somehow catch all this bandwidth that the attacker throws at you. But the general idea is to identify the critical devices and processes in your company. So if you know that all your web services sit in a central database, then maybe your web service is distributed on some on local machines, but you only have one database. Then your database, of course, might be a bottleneck, and DDoS can still bring the database down indirectly. You have to identify these hot paths basically. And then implement and test stuff like failover response. So what happens if the device is overloaded? Is there a failure? Is there a backup? Is there a hot spare? Something we can really switch to. And a recovery plan if the device fails. So how can you recover to maybe a backup or another machine? Then the last category here, which we titled access through intermediaries. So here it just means the access is carried out through a third party basically, and it can be like anything that doesn't require physical access to the target machine. And there might be something like the USB drive you want to know, which I also put this presentation on. So in theory, maybe my machine is also compromised now because of this bad USB stick that I got. But basically it usually leverages an on-run feature of the operating system. By now this has been made easier by Windows and the other operating systems, but in the previous days you could have a correct USB stick that immediately executes anything on it just if you plug it in. And that is then getting some malware or something else with the machine. And usually they infect another removable devices to spread across multiple machines. If you remember Stuxnet, then this also spread largely to USB sticks that were carried around, because the devices themselves did not even have internet access. So this malicious computer worms, some history about that. But the interesting thing is that it's usually introduced via an infected USB flash drive and copied itself into another USB flash drive that is basically maybe attached to the same machine, and then it got carried around basically by the people that are using it. So USB drive here is just one example. It can also be other removable devices, but to a certain point, because you see this point of anything that doesn't require physical access. So if you click a phishing link or malware is attached, then it also basically is an intermediary for the attacker to get in the machine. Depends on how you want to draw the boundary with that basically. There are some ways you can deal with that. So you should never share your devices, or just share with people you trust. You can also use stuff like using untrusted computers. So you have a separate machine that you can check all your removable devices on, and you can also scan and format your removable devices before you plug them into your actual production machine. I've also seen organizations where there's policies, for example, that you can only use new USB sticks that are directly taken out of the wrap. So you can basically have a USB stick, you put it out of the packaging, plug it in, and use it one time to transfer it to some other PC, and then you cannot use the USB stick anymore to prevent this other spreading. That's maybe a bit extreme, but there are organizations that have these policies to prevent it. What can we do? So this is not just what can we do for this kind of attack, but what can we do more in general? So how can we secure ourselves? And you come to the next part. From an organizational perspective, you should have security audits and assessments. Similar to what I've already talked about with the user part, but you should have general audits where people look at your internal and your external security, so how are processes inside the organization and how are the interfaces to the outside world. There's stuff like firewall ports, how are they configured, how are packet flows, how is traffic control, how is network authentication actually between the subnets and how is access control realized. So this is all something that can be audited, assessed, and regularly so. Also, you should have a report and everything. You should generate reports in repeating cycles and remediation plan to fix vulnerabilities. So if something is discovered anywhere, there should be a plan to assess it, to handle it basically, and to fix maybe vulnerabilities that are found. And this can either be done by your own organization if you have the expertise, or as we saw earlier, there are a lot of external companies that specialize in this kind of work. So you can also hire a specialized third party that does this for your organization. Then, especially if the third party does this, you need to care about governance. So all these procedures that the third party performs have to be well documented and have to be reported to you. And then if you apply policies in the organization, you should have stuff like rules for passwords, which I've already mentioned for complexity and length. You should have role-based access control to prevent this use of external credentials. Also, rules for reporting potential security weaknesses. So when you see something that looks suspicious, there needs to be clear contact, and needs to know what this contact is to contact them basically. And requirements that, for example, security patches, updates, and fixes are finally applied. Because WannaCry, by the time it came out, this vulnerability was already patched by Microsoft. So if you have had applied a patch in time, then you have been safe by default for WannaCry, which of course a lot of people did not do. Also, your incident response plan should contain something like the various types of breaches that may appear and plan ahead for that. The response is, of course, tied to the security of the severity of the breach. So, as I said, especially with internal threats, not every attack basically is highly critical, but you should, of course, have a backup for these really highly critical scenarios when your customer database gets stolen or something like that. And there should be specific roles during or following the breach. So, basically, the personnel that handles that, so response team. And also in the follow-up, so who restores backups, not just a random person, but a dedicated team maybe, so that should be addressed. And if you really want to be prepared, you can run exercises that simulate an attack or a breach or a backup scenario or something like that to actually test that your measures that you've all defined are actually working. So that was more from an organizational perspective, but for the single person, there's also different areas which you can address. So first there are wireless connections, which we all use daily, so here I just connected to eRoom, of course. But the problem is you cannot always trust it, that your data is handled correctly or not maliciously. So there are multiple things that can happen. You can get eavesdropped, so the credentials might get stolen, or stuff like an evil twin attack. So you have access point, it looks like something you've already predicted to, but it's basically a malicious one, and intercepts your communication. This can then lead to a man-in-the-middle attack where someone intercepts your communication and even changes it, so not just eavesdropping, but actually injecting different resources. And yeah, this is of course bad. We don't want this to happen in any random wireless network that we connect to. So yeah, what can we do about this? Okay, so here is another picture of this rogue access point. Basically, you see that this connection is not going to the legitimate IP anymore, but through this rogue access point, and then the attacker can even use the original access point to he doesn't need to have an own uplink basically, and can basically move your connection. So what can we do about that? If you want to secure your own router, you of course should always change the default combinations of using a password, similar to any other device that you use basically, so the attacker cannot really take over your actual access point. You should use large, long, complex passphrases so they can be easily enforced. You can do stuff like MAC filtering to only allow a wide list of devices and not just any random person that connects to your access point. And use good encryption, something like WPA2, WPA3, something like that. And also from the administrative perspective, if you have access points, but if you connect to an access point, there's of course always the possibility to use VPN, virtual private network, for anonymity and privacy. Usually you can also use it to private resource sharing, but in this case it's more that you just want to prevent the eavesdropping part of the access point, so you set up a VPN so all your traffic is encryptedly routed through the VPN server, and anything that is basically in here, so the access point that's being malicious cannot eavesdrop anymore, because if this encrypted tunnel to the internet basically. And if you think more about personal information, so all the stuff that you don't want to get out, stuff like your social security number, your contact information, your birth date, but also your geolocation, which often changes of course, but it's also very sensitive, and stuff like the certification data, mother's maiden name, pet name, whatever. All this, of course, you need to protect, and the tricky part is the singular thing might not look that personal. So okay, maybe a lot of people have a mother with the same name as yours, but especially the combination of these information is critical, right? Because if you know that the person has this mother's maiden name and this birthplace that already stood down quite a bit, and then maybe also contact information, and every more piece of information that you add, your profile basically gets more complete. And you can be traced across a large crowd of people, basically. So this can be embarrassing. Yeah, okay, if your test results are leaked, drug tests, but also regular tests for medical checkups. And the loss is especially if your identity gets stolen. This is especially problematic because people can basically, open bank accounts in your name, steal your money from your existing bank accounts, impersonate you in other contracts, especially I think in America with the social security numbers, that's a large problem there. But the more information someone has on you, the easier it is to impersonate you, steal your identity. It can also impact your business practice and result in actions being taken against you as an employee. So if you, of course, if someone does something that looks like it comes from you, you might get fired for it, which is also pretty bad. Can also lead to a loss of reputation or loss of image damage basically to the organization. Because if your data gets stolen from a service, then you don't trust it that much maybe for the next time you use it. So we need to protect. We need to protect ourselves from it. And basically, because a lot of this information can be obtained in very different ways, it's hard to give general recommendations. But you should every time basically think about: do I need to publish this information somewhere? Is this really necessary? can I encrypt it maybe or share it to someone, so you shouldn't basically, I don't know, post your sensitive information publicly on Facebook, but you should rather have someone really use an encrypted instant messenger, or if you can prevent it, if you can use something like pseudonyms to hide behind that, then at least if information gets shared, no one knows that you shared it, but you just have this pseudonym that, again, first has to be linked to your person. But for me personally, for example, every time I use a service, I'm highly critical of using it if it needs information that I think it shouldn't need. So in Germany, or actually in Hamburg, we have this new ride service that is launched, which is something like Uber basically. But the first thing they want from you is when you launch the app is your telephone number. And I thought, okay, why does it use your telephone number? You can all be in the app. And that's when I stopped using it, or that's when I didn't start using it, because telephone numbers, I think, are really private, but it depends on how much you need it out. And a service that shouldn't really need it, should not really need it, still asks for it, and you may reevaluate if you really want to use the service. Especially if you're thinking about passwords, of course they are used to validate or authenticate yourself, but they are one of the most common attacks of attackers, so DDoS attacks as we've seen, but also in phishing attempts. Of course, this thing is this guessing thing, where there are these top lists in the internet that attackers use, but also if you really have a complex password, then at the end the attacker can just enumerate all possible combinations in the length of your password, and then basically guess it. So if someone really wants to break your password, and I don't know, it's maybe nation state or something, they can probably do so, but it will take a long time unless you use really long, really complex passwords. So as I said, these crackers use dictionaries or brute force. There's all stuff like rainbow tables, if you have hash passwords. But this guy also broken. There are some rules you should consider. Some rules that you should consider as the don'ts when thinking about passwords. So you should, of course, the most important, you should use different passwords for different services. So if one password gets leaked somehow or stolen, they cannot use it to log into any other services of you. You should use lengthy passwords, so they can be brute forced. And if you have to use dictionary words, then maybe use uncommon dictionary words or not use dictionary words at all. And the best thing, if you really want to be very secure, is to change them regularly. I have to admit, I don't do that. I have very long passwords, so I can change them very often. So that's kind of an extra measure. But what you should definitely not do is reuse passwords. Okay, we were in the first part. You either share your passwords to anyone, so of course to a phishing site, but also if like your friend or your colleague asks, like, just give me this password, I need to have something from you, can I just log into your machine or whatever. Think about it if you really want to do this. And of course, the classic, you should never write down your password physically in an easily accessible location. So if you want to be paranoid, you can put it in a logbox basically to have some secure copy, but don't do the thing where you tap your login password on a piece of paper and print it to a screen or something. That's, of course, very dangerous. So some general rules: you should have at least 16 characters. That's actually updated from the last slides, and later on there was 8 characters. I thought 60 is a bit more safe. If you want to be extra safe, I think I use something like 32 characters. But of course that only gets feasible if you use something like password managers, because I think no one can remember 20-something passwords that have all 32 characters. So we use password managers definitely. Something like one password can be used. There's also stuff like password safe and all these other variants. But what they all include is this password generator, where you just have to set some ground rules. So how long should it be? How should there be digits included, symbols, ASCII characters, whatever. And then you can generate all these passwords. And the best feature is here. The password is definitely revealed, but in the one that I use, it's not even revealed to me. So I cannot even remember it. It's not something that I actively see. Whenever I use it, I can just copy it from somewhere and paste it when I need it, and I cannot even remember random parts maybe of the password that I could otherwise give out. So it's really good to manage all your passwords in one place. And now to get to the end of the talk, some best practices that we collected. So the first one is, of course, as we mentioned, multiple times throughout the talk, you should educate the users and use strong passwords. So users can be anything, can be an employee, can be just your friend, your grandma, whatever. Tell them how to choose the same password and use this password manager if possible. And of course, make them aware of social engineering attacks that may happen. The second one is use some kind of antivirus. On Windows, there's very good with Microsoft Defender the default now tool, but there's also other variants. It usually works, not every time, but for large of these types of malware, they can be detected this way, which of course should be updated then. Also, what we've mentioned again already, never use default settings. Doesn't matter where, doesn't matter if it's your router, your IP camera, your smartphone, anything. Change them. You will probably also do this new network, as I said. Then, coming to the remote access part, don't run unnecessary services that you don't need. So, especially if you're administrating stuff in a network in an organization, just because the default configuration, for example, allows, I don't know, telnet or FTP connections, really check what is running and disable the ones that you need, because in that case they can be exploited and attacked, especially stuff like SMP or FTP or telnet, especially that you shouldn't really use those anymore. Then install security patches immediately. So as I said, you want to try, you could have been immediately prevented if you just install security patches, for example for Windows, but also for Office, for whatever you have, also on your smartphone, that's important. These 15 updates you get every day. Yeah, that helps a lot. Then, because there will be attacks or problems, faults that appear, backup your data regularly. In the best case, also offline, which means somewhere actually physically stored somewhere else. So for a company or for an organization, you should really consider offsite backup, where you ship your backup devices to another location. So if you, in the worst case, your data center runs down, you still have your data somewhere else. And protect that against power surges, but also could be political on fires, natural disasters, attacks, whatever. Limit who you trust. So each user should only have this level of access or permissions that they actually need. And also limit who you trust can be applied to, to services or persons that you talk to. Does this person or service really need this information from you, or can we do it somehow else? Then for an organization again, enable logging and review logs. So if you remember this blue case, it's not really detectable, but if you just enable logging and never look at it, this also doesn't help. Then you should expect that your protections are failing. So there will be attacks that get through a firewall that are not detected by your intrusion detection system, whatever the case. And you should have multiple layers of protection and not just one backup plan, but especially for an organization, a second backup and a third, and somewhere it stops, but you should have multiple backup plans. And manage your user accounts. So I've known personally for some cases where people stopped working in an organization and their account was still valid after maybe half a year after they left the company. This is of course very bad, and is unnecessary threat exposure because these privileges are leaked and someone has access. Don't click randomly. We've talked about that. You can also, if you're really paranoid, have secure physical access. So physically having locked your screen in Windows. We also have maybe these awareness trainings where people are told to lock the screen every time you leave. In our office, there's a special thing if someone uses their PC unlocked, we write a message in our communication platform that they have to bring a cake next time they come to helps. Yeah, maybe as a small summary here, threats in this era will grow. They are growing and they will grow further in the future, in both in number and in sophistication. So how complex the attacks are. You can take steps to mitigate them and to remedy them, but it's not always so easy. And usually the humans are the weakest thing. So like the fish, they might click on something because they forgot their training. And you should really invest in continuous user awareness training to prevent a lot of these attack vectors that we've seen, or at least limit their damage. And with that, I'm done. I think I'm a little late. But any questions, then go ahead. I don't know how much time we have. I gave all the slides. We could probably also give them off on
one share.
Yes, they will be shared somehow. These are the resources that I mentioned.
I have questions.
Yeah, sure.
2 days ago, Jeff Bezos, Amazon CEO, his personal information is hacked by someone, and he guessed he was this brings someone. He guessed, and then someone sent some message by email, I guess, or WhatsApp message, and we click this message and then receive. So how can we say? Because Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos is not safe by attacking. So how can we save, or what can we do?
Yeah, I guess that's the classic case of why this awareness training is needed. I think Jeff Bezos could have probably detected that the phishing attempt, and he would have paid attention. Maybe it was a sophisticated attack, probably, but I think there will have been some point in whether it be the URL or the message or the sender or somewhere else. There might have been a point where he could have detected that this is a phishing attempt, but I guess he was just not lazy, but he was just not aware. He was not, in this case, in this moment, maybe he was tired, maybe he was, I don't know, distracted. He just looked at it and clicked the link, and then he had already lost. So this just means even we as security professionals are not safe, right? So if we are not safe, Jeff Bezos is not safe, if I'm not safe, also I'm telling you this, this just means you have to tell the people even more that they have to be careful basically every time they interact with something, and to have this default assumption of being paranoid all the time. So if you see a message that you don't immediately know is like, it doesn't have a link or it's safe, then you should, every time you should think, is this really correct? Is this not a phishing attempt? So yeah, I don't know, there's no perfect answer, but just be aware and continuously tell the people that they also have to be aware.
I have one question. You've been to Portuguese hacker. 2 days ago, we had mentioned 70 million documents and 3.5 terabyte of information. And for this reason, he had some information of financial information, such as they did not provide tax or some type of information. And for this reason, Man City is banned for 2 years. Rio Tinto, Portuguese hacker. So, and this is hacked in 2015. So 4 years or 5 years, and Man City did not know how can organization be safe for this type of data.
So you mean how can you decide that the company handles it well?
Company side, user side.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult, right? So every time you see one of those large breaches, also there was this Sony credit card hack where there's so many credit cards details were exposed, and every time someone gets caught having plain text passwords in the database which are not hashed, every time you think, oh, they should have known better, and usually they should have known better, definitely. I think that's why it's even more important to think about if you should give out this information, because if you cannot give it out, if you not do the job, then of course it cannot get stolen. For stuff like tax information, it's you don't really have a choice probably, but yeah, in these cases, for example, if talking about governmental things or really large organizations, I think you just have to, be hopeful that they know what's happening and they know what data they collect and how they store it. Because actually you cannot know how the people handle your data, how the organizations handle your data, I think you have to be you have to think about it every time. Do I want to know? And if I, for example, have the option to buy something via credit card or to buy something via invoice where I wire them the amount afterwards, I usually choose the second one because if they don't have my credit card details, they cannot do it. So it's just a matter of you cannot know it. Besides, you start working for the company and look what actually happens. But besides that, you cannot know it. And that's why it's even more important to think about what data you give out and what you do if they get breached. So there's unfortunately, there's no good answer here, but I think you just have to really be careful who you share your data with.
Is he hacker or something else? Because for Messi, he is hacker. But for football fans or other organizations, he shares some information which is necessary. So how can we identify a person is a hacker or something else?
I mean, if you give out your data directly to the hackers, so if you get phished, for example, then of course you should apply all these rules that are on the slide. So look at the URL, look at the legitimacy. But of course, nothing stops a person or a hacker from opening, a legitimate organization, a legitimate company to provide some service that is useful. And then at some point, maybe they are legitimate and they do the stuff that you pay them to or that you use it for. And then at some point, they say, okay, my plan is now fulfilled. I have 6 million, user accounts, and now I can use this data for malicious purposes. I mean, in the end, you cannot know, and unfortunately, that's a very sad answer, I know, but you cannot know the true intentions of the person. And if the service or the company, what they provide is valuable to you for the information you give them, then you should just, I do it the same way, then you use it. But in the end, there is a certain kind of trust involved. So if I every time use PayPal, I'm hopefully secure. They handle my credential data well. But of course, if tomorrow the core administrator of PayPal says, "Oh, I want to get all this data now," and they don't have all this internal organizational monitoring stuff, then maybe my data gets stolen. I don't know. So there's no perfect way. As usual with security, there's no 100% guarantee that you safe. Be paranoid, be careful what you share, and at some point be actually trust people, because sometimes there are legitimate organizations, of course, that you can trust those. By experience.
Thank you for your. I want to know why form attract vectors. Why it is vectors? The name. So very simple. Why it is vector?
I think that's really just to think about how. So vector is kind of a technical way where someone can get access, who's not supposed to get access. So we're talking about crypto vectors or vectors in operating systems, something like that. And I think this is just derived from like your actual backdoor at your home or something like that, where you have the front door, which people are supposed to use, but you as a person who knows there is a backdoor, and you have the key maybe, which is a different key than the main key, you can get it there and get in the house. And in this case, the same for a large software system. So if there is a backdoor that maybe has a weaker password or has no password at all, that is just hidden, and people know that this vector is there, then they can use it. And that's also the case why every argument for a vector is bad. So there have been governmental ways. For example, Australia has this big push that the companies should install a vector actually for government. And that's why an argument for the vector is bad, because if there is a vector, someone can find it and someone can use it. And this is usually the way that you don't want to use the backdoor. So backdoor attack.
Thank you very much.